A shocker in Columbus. Buckeyes go down 35-28, but there is still a season ahead, and it's time to pick up the pieces and move on, regardless of what some people may say. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. We always enjoy the conversation with Pat, who joins us on a regular basis. And again, check out his work at 247's Bucknuts. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. How you doing, Mark?
I am doing just fine. So I got to say, leading into this game, I was surprised by how many people were so convinced Ohio State would win with no issue. And I'm talking about even neutral people, not even Ohio State fans. The only people that I came across that would give feedback to the channel or that I would speak to directly were Oregon fans, of course, that felt that even two Oregon writers came on here, really felt as though they had no chance. Let's just look good, put up a good fight, and go home. That it was that much of a mindset, and it was reflected by the Vegas line at pushing 15 points that Ohio State was supposed to win this game that easily.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to our Oregon writers. I was on their podcast last week, and the same thing. You know, they expected Oregon to come in and hopefully fight and keep it a good game and make it compelling. But they all expected to go back to Eugene with Oregon having lost. And I think that probably speaks more to what Ohio State has done the last 2 years under Ryan Day, winning the Big Ten pretty easily both seasons, getting to the college football playoff, obviously playing in the national championship game last year. And I think what you saw is that, you can't just put on the helmet, put on those uniforms and expect that same level from Ohio State, for a variety of reasons, which we'll get to. This didn't live up to Ohio State games of the past 2 years. And it's interesting. I saw this stat on Twitter the other day. Ohio State, I think it's 5 straight week 2 marquee opponents that have come to Ohio Stadium that Ohio State has lost that game, which is probably just a weird coincidence. But, I think you go back to Texas, USC, Oklahoma, now Oregon. I think there's one more in there, but just kind of a weird coincidence. But I think everyone kind of got a dose of reality in Buckeye Nation this week that this team, while still very talented, may not be quite at the level at this point in the season as the last 2 Buckeye teams have been.
I believe you forgot the one that Ohio State fans actually want to remember because it was against Virginia Tech in 2014.
Yeah, that one. There it is.
So if they can repeat what happened after that, then I think we're all good. Of course, the Buckeyes won the national championship after losing to, a marquee program to a certain extent, but actually a not very good Virginia Tech team that finished 7-6, but things worked out after that. Pat Murphy's on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to talk Ohio State football. Tulsa's the next opponent. Of course, we're talking mostly about what happened against Oregon. Let's start on the defensive side because I think the last 3 drives of the game, Ohio State finally put pressure on the quarterback, got stops. Ironically, that's when the offense stopped producing and they couldn't make up the touchdown deficit. But the defense up until the final couple drives of the game was just non-existent from the standpoint of stopping anything or creating any turnovers, negative plays, anything.
Yeah, exactly. I think obviously coming into this year, there were questions about the defense with Ohio State's defense last year. The Buckeyes still made it to the national championship game, but I think that was a lot of it was masked by Justin Fields and that offense. This year, I think everyone knew the defense had to be better. You have a redshirt freshman quarterback who had never thrown a pass until 2 weeks ago. A lot of young guys, even on the offensive side of the ball. So the defense needed to get better. Against Minnesota, we got a warning sign that this was not the case. The Gophers were able to move the ball, especially on the ground, pretty easily. And, when Mohamed Ibrahim went out with an injury, they were able to pass and continue to move the ball. So I still had a lot of questions about Ohio State defensively coming into this game. I thought that there would be progress made and, that Buckeyes would be able to handle it. But Oregon puts up 505 yards, a really balanced attack with 269 rushing yards, 236 passing yards, and were really able to do whatever they wanted. The defensive line got little to no pressure, as you mentioned, until late, really when Oregon was just kind of trying to run out the clock and keep Ohio State's offense off the field for as much as possible. And, the secondary was okay. The cornerbacks, one freshman cornerback and Cameron Brown, who, while he is a fourth-year junior, has only played a little bit of football. I thought those guys actually played all right. It was the stuff over the middle that was where Oregon was really hitting Ohio State in the passing game. The Buckeyes linebackers were very poor, couldn't get anything figured out. Oregon scored 3 of their touchdowns on essentially the same run play, motion to the right, run to the left, and Ohio State couldn't get that figured out. And I think that's the biggest thing is the adjustments or lack thereof were so apparent in this game. Even before watching the game over again, you could just see from sitting in the press box, Oregon's running the same things. They did a couple pass plays where they got tight end. One was for a touchdown. One was for a big first or a third down conversion. It was essentially the same play but flipped. I think at least that's what it looked like. Ohio State just didn't respond. A lot of questions have been asked of Kerry Combs these last couple of days, Ohio State's defensive coordinator the last 2 years. But I think this whole Buckeye staff has to, defensively especially, has to, kind of look in the mirror here, because every level of the defense struggled to some degree. And, obviously you have some time here before you get into Big Ten play with 2 weeks against some, on paper at least, inferior non-conference opponents. But, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it needs to happen at all 3 levels for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, on the play that you're highlighting, the run play to the left, yeah, they seem to have the philosophy that we can bring a man in motion. That's going to bring one defender over to the opposite side of the field, and then we're going to crash down this wide receiver that's going to seal everything. And it was just wide open those 3 times running to the left. Yeah. Because of the struggles of the secondary last year, it's disappointing, but not a total surprise that there wouldn't be great play in the secondary at this point. The linebackers, for as much as they were criticized prior to, they were experienced players who made most of the plays and were in the right position. Obviously, those guys have moved on, and you got a new set of players there at linebacker. So not necessarily a surprise there. I think people are surprised by the lack of production from a defensive line that, from a talent standpoint, you would think would be devastating. Could potentially be the best line in the country, because 3 5-stars play on that line. To be fair, 2 of them are true freshmen who have never stepped on the field before, so only so much can be expected. But still, with Haskell Garrett and Zach Harrison in obviously 2 different roles and positions, but still that type of talent up front, you would think that the defensive line would have anchored this thing to allow the other 2 units to develop throughout the season.
Yeah, and that was the plan. I mean, for Ohio State, we heard heading into the season about this defensive line. Zach Harrison was supposed to take a jump and become that next former 5-star prospect, like a Nick Bosa, Chase Young type. He did make a big play in the game against Minnesota, but was more or less non-existent against Oregon. Was one of the reasons they were able to hit some of those plays in the run game, because he kept, I don't know if he was being coached to do this or if this was just an instinct thing, but he kept crashing inside instead of staying more to the outside, especially after they hit it on Ohio State once. Slow down the running back, allow other guys to get over after, as you mentioned, that block from the receiver. So, very disappointing from him. Haskell Garrett, again, was involved in that big play last weekend against Minnesota, but he doesn't look like the player that received an All-American honoree last year. You have to begin to wonder what difference Tommy Togiai. Obviously, he was a key player at nose tackle for the Buckeyes last year, but how much better he made maybe Haskell Garrett. And obviously, it's a long season. Haskell Garrett can still produce, but he doesn't look like the player the Buckeyes saw last year. None of the other defensive ends have really stepped up. It's been disappointing. You mentioned the 2 true freshmen, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimalau. They may be the 2 most talented defensive ends Ohio State has, but they're true freshmen. Even a Nick Bosa, Chase Young, Joey Bosa didn't really come on until their sophomore years. Even Zach Harrison, had a decent freshman year. It's tough to expect 2 true freshmen to be your star defensive ends. And at a place like Ohio State, you shouldn't have to do that. So, The defensive line, I think, was expected to kind of handle things to allow the rest of this defense to work. If they're not getting pressure, especially with the young secondary, young group of linebackers, inexperience all over both those positions, if that front four isn't able to do what it has done in the past, then Ohio State's defense really isn't as effective. And I think you saw that in each of these last two games, frankly.
We talk Ohio State football on a regular basis here with Pat Murphy from Bucknuts 247 Sports. So please check out Pat's work right there at Bucknuts. We've got Ohio State post-game coverage right here at the Voice of College Football. Next game up, Tulsa at 3:30 Eastern on Saturday. Going to the offense, on one hand, it's hard to be critical of 600 plus yards of total offense, but only 28 points produced.
Right.
I think that the wide receiver core would be the only unit on the field, offense or defense, that you couldn't find anything wrong with. Those guys are just playing lights out. Garrett Wilson seems to get open by 5 yards every time the ball's thrown his way. It just seems like he can burn any corner that's placed up against him. Of course, much was made of the discrepancy between the pass attempts, 54, and the running back rush attempts, that they possibly gave up on the run too soon. They were down by generally a score and then 2 scores and then a score, back and forth between 1 and 2 scores in the second half. So just your thoughts about the run pass ratio.
Yeah, I do. I agree that I think Ryan Day went a little pass heavy, and he's apt to do that. They weren't establishing a ton with the run game early on. Finished the game with just 128 yards on 31 carries, which is a good number of carries. But I think Ohio State could have worn Oregon down some more with the passing attempts, especially given you have a redshirt freshman quarterback making his second start. To ask him to throw the ball 54 times is a lot. And as we learned after the game, he was dealing with a bit of a shoulder injury. If you watch the game, he was flexing that shoulder quite a bit throughout the game. He said he was fine and ready to go, but that he dealt with some things throughout the week. You have a quarterback that's dealing with a bit of a bum shoulder, and you want to throw the ball 54 times. That's a tough ask in my book. I think sticking with the run to some degree, maybe you don't hit the big plays that they were able to hit in the past game, but I do think you wear Oregon down a little bit. They did do a good job. Credit to the Ducks, clogging up lanes and things like that to run through. But when you have guys like Mayan Williams, who Ohio State really likes, Travion Henderson, who's really emerging even quicker than I thought, it seems to me you've got to get those guys involved. And 14 and 12 carries respectively is not a bad number. But again, 54 pass attempts is just a lot for a young quarterback to have to handle, especially in a close game.
Yeah, it goes beyond just trying to establish a balanced offense. But yeah, you speak to it well in regards to putting that type of workload and stress level on a young quarterback against a very fine defense, despite losing a number of key players, including Kayvon Thibodeau, of course. So what was your assessment of Stroud's performance? When you throw the ball 54 times, most likely you are going to throw an interception. So everybody magnifies the pick. Of course, it wasn't in the first quarter. It was late in the game when they needed to make up a touchdown. So it does get magnified.
Yeah, the interception was not good. It came on Ohio State's last real offensive drive. He had to roll out to the right, got flushed out, and just overthrew Chris Olave. And he admitted after the game that Olave did a good job executing the scramble drill, and he just missed him. And unfortunately for Ohio State, it was third down. There was a defender there to pick the ball off. If that falls incomplete, at least you live to fight for another down. But that was poor. He did miss some throws, did miss some guys, which was true in the Minnesota game. But I still think C.J. Stroud continues to show that he's the guy for the job. There's going to be mistakes. This is a kid who is just learning the position in game. It wasn't like a Justin Fields or a Dwayne Haskins or some of other Ohio State quarterbacks of the past who had experience in games in previous years in a backup role. Stroud played in 3 games last year, barely did anything, had 1 big run against Michigan State, didn't throw a pass. So you knew there were going to be growing pains. I thought he played well. I think the numbers show in terms of his passing numbers, 484 yards, 3 touchdowns. I believe 484 yards is the most by any player so far this year. Small sample size, but still something. So, if Buckeye fans are questioning CJ Stroud, if he's the guy or anything like that, I think that's a little bit reactionary. I think he's looked as good as expected. It's not like he started off with two, cupcake style opponents. These were two legitimate teams in Minnesota, a Big Ten team, and obviously Oregon. So that's, getting thrown to the fire a little bit. And I think he's responded. You don't like to see the 2 interceptions he's thrown. You do like to see him make a few better decisions. But for the most part, I think you're happy with what CJ Stroud has done.
And Pat, you rewatched the game. In regards to the offensive line's performance, I wouldn't call it by any stretch a dominant performance, nor did they get overwhelmed or dominated. It seemed to be, a struggle between a top-notch offensive line, but a very capable defensive front where they were winning their share of the battles, but also losing some. And they seemed to give Stroud plenty of protection through most of the game. But then later in the game, I don't know if it was that they wore down and Oregon had enough of a rotation on the defensive front, or it was just so obvious that Ohio State was passing all the time that they seemed to give up more pressures late in the game.
Yeah, they definitely did. And there were some holding calls. DeJuan Jones, I think, a couple of times. Thayer Munford, a big one, which I know some fans were questioning whether or not that was enough for a hold on one of the late drives where CJ Stroud ran for a first down, and then that was negated. But, yeah, I think in terms of protection for Stroud, I think the offensive line was pretty good. Not good enough in the run game. But the talk coming into the season was that this could be one of the best offensive lines in the country. They moved Thayer Munford from left tackle to left guard, to got Paris Johnson in at right tackle, moved Nicholas Petit-Frere over. These are mostly 4- and 5-star kids. DeJuan Jones was a little under-recruited and has played fairly well. But, this was supposed to be a really good offensive line. And I think through the first 2 games, they've been solid, not great. The penalties were a problem. Only giving up 1 sack through 2 games, which is good for sure. But you want to get that running game going more in this game. Obviously, they did establish that against Minnesota. So I would say it's a middle of the road performance, B- type of thing from the offensive line, which is not good enough when that's something you're really expecting to lean on if you were Ohio State coming into the season.
Buckeyes fall to 1-1, losing to Oregon. And they'll be in Big Ten play again here in a few weeks. But first, it's Tulsa and it's Akron. So, of course, Pat, at this stage of the season, most Ohio State observers thought, okay, 2-0. Then you go to the soft part of the schedule. You work on some things that needed to be worked on, most notably linebackers, secondary. Let's see how they play and if they're able to work some things out. But now it becomes more of the narrative of how good is this team? Well, regardless of what they do, they can win 75-0 the next few games, and nobody's going to give them much credit for that. And then later in the season to see if they've righted the wrongs and they're able to, again, be Big Ten champions. So is there anything that you're looking for the next few weeks to kind of grade the progress of them getting back to where they need to be?
I think, like you said, we're not going to be able to know for sure that things have improved until further down the season. Once you really get into Big Ten play, start playing some good, like for like talent level opponents. What you have to see though is the defense has to improve in terms of, you can't, even if you win the game next week against Tulsa, you can't have a team that threw for 300 yards or, scored 28 points or, something like that. There needs to at least be signs that this is improving, even if it is against inferior opponents. If those inferior opponents are doing similar things to what Minnesota and Oregon did, then you still have some serious problems. I'll also be looking to see defensively if there's any schematic changes. Ohio State maybe without Josh Proctor, their single high safety. He left the game in an air cast on a cart, so that doesn't look good. We'll probably find out more about his injury later on. Do they go with more traditional two safety looks? What different things are they going to incorporate? Because going back to, the Clemson, Alabama games last year and even some games during the season, Indiana obviously stands out. Teams have really been able to manipulate this Ohio State defense. And the talk this offseason was having a full offseason was going to be a major fix, but they also talked about having change-ups and things that they could throw at a defense, and they really haven't had much. They're playing with what they call the bullet linebacker position, which is kind of a hybrid safety linebacker. That's a little bit different than what they've done in the past, but not a ton. I'd like to see some things that are clearly, okay, we're making adjustments here, better fit the personnel, things like that. I'd also like to see Ohio State stop rotating as many guys defensively. it's a lot of guys playing, which leads me to believe that they're not set on certain guys. The line coming from the Buckeyes is, we have a lot of talent. We want to get it on the field. I get that. But, to me, I think the real thing is in certain positions, guys haven't stepped up and, earned the starting spot or solidified themselves as the guys. You look at cornerback, it's Denzel Burke, the freshman. It was Cameron Brown this week. Those were the two main guys out there. Legend Cavazos rotated in a little bit as well. To me, those positions look set. Linebacker, there's too many guys playing. Defensive line, there may be too many guys playing. And I know they rotate on the defensive line a lot. So it's just, I want to see improvements, obviously, but I think those specific things are things that you can, even playing an inferior opponent, you can kind of touch on to say, hey, at least there's something changing here. We'll see how those changes work down the road. But, Ohio State is clearly going out of its way to make changes and adjust after, two very disappointing defensive games to start the season.
Pat, I'm glad you brought up the Proctor injury, because while there is so much, I'm not going to say star power on the defense, it's actually potential star power on the defense with all the 5 stars. He might be one of the most important players on the team, and he doesn't get a whole lot of credit or acclaim. But yeah, many of those plays that broke down defensively, you would have thought that he would have been in the right spot where they had a safety vacate who got duped by motion or a pattern where the 76-yard touchdown run comes to mind in particular, where the entire middle of the field was vacated. So it would not be good if he's lost for the season and they're not able to get somebody up to speed.
For sure. And, the Minnesota game, it stands out to me. There was a number of times where Josh Proctor was back there signaling the other guys. They had two freshmen, one true freshman, one redshirt freshman playing corner. He was, making sure guys were in the right position. Clearly one of the leaders on this defense, the back end there. Losing him is a big blow. He finally started to step into that Jordan Fuller role from a couple of years ago. Kind of be that guy at the back of the defense to cover up anything that gets out of there. And you saw as soon as he went out, Bryson Shaw took a bad angle, and Cameron Brown wasn't able to make the tackle on that big run that you referred to. So, I think Ohio State's got to go with more 2 safety looks. I just don't think they have that guy to play the single high safety, especially with Proctor out. They've done it more than they have maybe in the past, but I think it's got to be, maybe that's your base defense here, and you just change things up. Just, you can't have these type of plays happening, especially with so many young guys out there. I think getting another safety on the field to kind of be able to patrol that back end is going to be key.
Great stuff from Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Join him right there, and keep in mind that we've got Ohio State post game right here at the Voice of College Football. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Absolutely. Thank you.